Dr. Smith, Superintendent of EVSC. We're excited tonight. We're doing a Facebook Live event, so thanks for sticking around so that we could have a really productive conversation this evening.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the conversation.
You know, let's just start with a few things here as we get started. So just to kind of recap where we are in terms of what we're doing this evening. So this is Facebook Live. You know, we do a lot of communication through social media, but we thought it might be nice to actually do a live event where we could take some questions from people that are watching. So I'll be feeding those to you throughout this time. I've also been saving quite a few questions we've already received. We had people reaching out through our Contact Us feature, through social media earlier. So we've already got quite a few questions. So we'll kind of blend those two together for you. And then one thing so people are aware, you know, we always say go to evscschools.com for our website where we house information. We're going to take the questions and the answers that you're able to provide, and over the next couple of days, we're going to put those in written form under the FAQ section. So if you're the type of person that likes to listen, you've got the podcast. If you prefer to go back and look at it in writing, go to our website under FAQs, and it'll be there.
Sounds good to me.
With that being said, let's go ahead and get started and jump right in here. Good. So before we move forward, I know you felt it was important through our conversations to kind of look back to last week and talk about something that really did have an impact on quite a few of our students, and that's the seniors, because of the decision regarding commencement. So you want to just take us through that, because I know that was a tough one.
It certainly was, and I think everybody knows that we tried to do everything we could to have in-person graduations, and frankly, I think this is an example of how rapidly things change, because we were within 2 hours of pushing the button to send out additional information.
That is correct.
About what parents needed to do for commencement, and then we got wind that the governor probably was going to make an announcement that warranted us holding that. So nobody wanted to make that decision, but based upon the governor and going really from not stage 4 to stage 5, but going to what he calls stage 4.5, but really was a hold or a pause, or in some ways rolling a few things back. And because of that, you know, the plans that we had put forward to the health department, when the health department learned of the governor's stage 4.5, you know, we consulted with them, certainly the governor's office and his comments, and just didn't feel that we could have commencement as we wanted to. And that's troubling to me.
Sure. Well, you spent many years working in high schools, and I know that was a really difficult decision.
And I know it's disappointing for seniors and their families. So we can offer a little bit of good news, if you will, but we will make graduation video. So we'll have the principal with the commencement address, the student speaker, board member accepting the class, then making certain that everyone is still acknowledged that way. Not a great substitute for an in-person graduation to get to walk across the stage, but
sure.
Unfortunately, we're in times where we have to make these decisions.
Right. And, you know, we've said all the way back to last March when all of this began that, I mean, really, we stay in such close contact and following the guidance from not only the governor's office, but from the state and local health officials.
Correct.
And we take their guidance so seriously, and because that's how, working together, we can try to keep people as safe as possible.
Correct.
Okay, let's do this. Let's move forward now and talk about some of the options. We've kind of outlined in some earlier communication 3 options moving forward, because as we're getting ready to reopen, people say, what are my options if you're a parent? So we've got a slide we're going to throw up on the screen here so that people can take a look at that. So you want to just take us through that, maybe what got us to this point, and then just elaborate on each one.
Sure. Instead of jumping right into those 3 options, I do want to take just a moment to walk everybody through how we got here.
Yeah,
First of all, we have guiding principles for everything. The guiding principles for the reopening of school really were the health and well-being of our students and staff paramount in our decision making. We also, second guiding principle, we wanted to provide options that meet the needs of our students and families as we move from reopening into the recovery phase. And then finally, we know this takes a great deal of collaboration and cooperation by all stakeholders. These really are unprecedented times. Nobody anticipated being where we are. So as we'll talk in a little bit, you know, this is really going to require an all hands on deck approach from everybody, students, parents, staff members, everyone alike. So a couple key points to mention based upon those guiding principles. We also understand the importance and the value of the student-teacher relationship, as well as the role that schools play in providing that safe, stable environment for parents who have to work outside the home. And you'll see, I think, how that played into our decision-making tree. We also understand that future conditions are going to be potentially very different than the conditions that we currently face. So we have to make certain that we have nimble solutions for those ever-changing conditions brought about by COVID-19. Third, in any scenario, we know that the following precautions are important in limiting the spread of COVID-19. That is frequent, thorough hand washing, making certain that we adhere to social distancing and wearing masks, especially when social distancing is difficult to practice. And then third is a thorough cleansing and disinfecting of frequently in high-touched areas. We also, frankly, understand the emotion that all of this uncertainty has brought about. And I really do appreciate everyone's patience. I'm looking forward to tonight so that we can share some of the process that's brought us really to where we are now. So these decisions were not made lightly. Months ago, we started doing a great deal of research. There were countries, European and Asian countries, that were starting to open up. We studied what worked well for them and what didn't work well, also listening to the guidance of the CDC as well as the state and local health officials. 5 weeks ago, we went into schools and we looked at setups of classrooms for social distancing. Also along that time, all of our directors of school supports, along with principals, covered every square foot of our facilities. That's over 5 million square feet of facilities to see how we could utilize and repurpose spaces for learning spaces.
And that's really that analyzing of learning spaces, really looking at every nook, every cranny, every spot to try to determine where we can best.
And all that is predicated upon, in any scenario, we have to make certain that we can adhere to the precautions of thorough and complete hand washing, and frequent hand washing, social distancing, all of those things. So 2 weeks ago, we felt comfortable with the research and with the analysis we had done with our school buildings that we could tell the public that you need to start planning for this scenario. We fully anticipate being back in the brick and mortar setting. We also, along our guiding principles, wanted to provide options for parents in case that didn't work. And I understand why there are options where that would not work for parents or students. So that brought us 2 or 3 options. But I also want to just explain kind of the domino impact that all this has. So when you weigh how you can accomplish social distancing in schools, there are basically 2 major factors that play into that. How do you create distance with the same number of students? You can do that either by dispersing the students, which means you have to add additional staff or add additional classes. Or the other option is that you could have students go every other day. So you could just split the alphabet in half and have the first half go on A days and the second half go on B days. When we think about elementary age school children and the pressure that puts on parents that work outside the home, that really was not a good situation for, I think, the Evansville community. Also, based upon the research of other countries, we know that when they restarted their communities, they often did so having elementary age school children go back to school first full time. So that was the first domino to fall. And we did that based upon the fact that we wanted to provide that stable environment for our families to the extent that we possibly could. But we also had to do the research necessary in our facilities to see if we could accomplish social distancing.
Because you've said before, school facilities, when they were built, not necessarily built to keep kids apart, often built to keep kids together. So that presents challenges that we had to work through.
Yeah. So I think it's important for everybody to understand on a macro level, we needed to determine, how we can best accomplish social distancing, bearing in mind the needs of our families, and then how we can merge that, make that decision. And then that next domino is, schools, now how can you schedule students? How can you utilize all of the facilities in your school buildings, perhaps to a different and a higher purpose? So to that end, we created the 3 options. Option A would be learning at school, and this is really the traditional brick and mortar setting, but accomplishing social distancing, making certain that we can do that frequent and thorough hand washing with our students scheduled for them, and then also that thorough clean and disinfecting for those high-touch surfaces. Option B is remote. And this is where I think feedback from parents and others has helped us clarify the message for folks.
Yeah, this is a great example of we always appreciate feedback because it really does play into our process as it evolves.
Right. We know that there are going to be instances, and probably many, many instances, where students will have to self-quarantine at home because either they have tested positive for COVID or their parents or somebody that they live with has tested positive.
Possible exposure in the immediate family, anything like that.
Absolutely. So if someone in the family is positive for COVID, then that entire family, at least the students that we have, will be required to stay home. Okay, so how do we still keep students connected in to their school? How do we still help the learning continuum carry forward as interrupted as possible, knowing that this is a temporary
And I think
scenario?
that's the key. That remote learning option is for a temporary situation that could pop up really at any time during the school year.
So folks probably will not know, and I think it'd be difficult for them to know at this stage if option B is an appropriate option for them. I would think once we get within a week or two of schools, then that option may become more apparent based upon their need. Option C then is the virtual academy. And really what we've done with our virtual academy is we've, I think, helped tighten up parameters of our virtual academy, once again based upon feedback. So if you have someone that has a weakened immune system, if you have, be it a student or someone that the student lives with, then I think the virtual academy is a phenomenal option. What we're asking for is that if you are a kindergarten through 8th grade student, that then you make a commitment to the virtual academy, if that's the option you choose, for at least a quarter. Okay, 9 weeks. If you're a high school student, then that commitment would be for the first semester. And the reason why for that is, frankly, high school students earn credits. Okay, so, and that is on a semester by semester basis. So,
And I want to make sure we're clear on that too. So let's back up for a second. Elementary and middle school, because again, based on feedback, this is an area too that we've looked at making some adjustments. We're not saying a semester. That is only for high school. So if you have a kindergarten through 8th grade student, and that is the option you're looking into for whatever reason, you're looking at basically a 9-week commitment, a grading period.
Correct, yes.
Okay.
And the reason for the commitment 9-week for K-8 or semester for high school students is that is a different curriculum.
That's right.
It's different content than what you will see in your traditional brick and mortar school. So
It's
we want
specially developed for a virtual program like
absolutely. And we've mentioned before, our virtual academy is nationally renowned. It's an outstanding virtual academy, and because of the situation that we face now with COVID-19, we are expanding our curriculum, and we're also expanding our capacity. Because our virtual academy was never meant for the number of students that we may receive, and we want to make certain that wherever you happen to find yourselves, that we have great opportunities and options for you.
And I wanted to clarify this too with the virtual academy. In fact, someone just sent this question in about an hour ago on one of our reminders about this event, and that was, and they clearly weren't as familiar with it. They said, is this the same type virtual program we've heard about throughout the state? And of course, the answer to that is no. This is our program that's been around for over a decade.
Correct. And as I said, nationally renowned. We've received, I think, a lot of positive feedback on this from folks that have utilized this for whatever reason for a number of years. I also want to stress that this virtual academy is far different and has been far different and will continue to be far different than what our seniors experienced the last quarter of last year. That was really an emergency situation.
Right.
And then with the governor's actions, we were trying to do the very best we could to get seniors in that unprecedented and unexpected time to graduation. But this is this is a very different virtual academy.
And some people do get that confused because we use the term virtual work like we did in the spring, virtual learning. But virtual academy is based on that type of work, but it is very different. And it is an excellent program with a lot of support, ongoing support from teachers.
Absolutely. And this is not something where a student will wake up on Monday morning after having a lot of activity over the weekend thinking, I think I'm just going to do virtual academy now.
Right.
That's not it. You have to be self-motivated, disciplined.
Sure.
It's a great program.
Yes.
But it is not for everybody.
Right, exactly. And so just to clarify again before we move on, and we'll come back and hit this again later on in case someone tunes in late because we don't want anyone to miss this. So when you look at those three options again, that learning at school option, kind of think that traditional school environment, we're going back to school. Of course, we've put into place and will continue to put in place protocols to make that environment as safe as possible.
Absolutely.
Option B, remote learning. That is something you can't really plan for right now. It's more of those temporary situations that could suddenly pop up. Quarantine situation, exposure, possible exposure in the immediate family, that type of thing. And you're still connected for the short term with your school. And then, of course, option C being, as you were just describing, the virtual academy. And that's either a 9-week commitment or a full semester if you're in high school.
Right.
Okay. And while we wrap up that point, Dr. Smith, we are going to send out a parent questionnaire on Wednesday evening. So what we thought we'd do is talk about it briefly right now. We'll send out a phone call to everyone in the district tomorrow for anyone who missed this, just so they get the information. And then we're going to send that out. It can be answered, I believe, via text or email on Wednesday. And basically what we're wanting to do with this questionnaire is to just see where parents are right now. So there would be an option to select if you're planning on returning to school in that Learn to School option A, the first option, or if you are giving consideration to the virtual academy. The remote learning option, like you just said, isn't really an option for the questionnaire because that's something you would know at this time. Right. So, and then if someone selects the virtual academy option, I believe you've been adamant that they're going to get a contact so that people can be in touch with them.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Because I think it's very important. The purpose of podcasts and even our FAQ is to give a pretty broad look at what we are accomplishing here and what we're undertaking. But it's still that personal touch that's so important. So if you want to do the virtual academy, you will indicate that on the questionnaire, and then you will receive a follow-up communication.
Okay. All right, let's move forward a little bit now. And of course, we knew this topic would come up, and I see Susie just submitted this question on Facebook Live. And of course, this is part of a bigger topic as well. But her question is dealing with school buses, and will students be asked to wear a mask on the school bus? So maybe that'd be a good segue for us to talk a bit about bus transportation, and then we can kind of talk about the masks because I see several questions pertaining to masks.
Sure.
So let's talk about the bus first, if you would.
Bus transportation, I think, is the most difficult aspect to accomplish social distancing within any of our school activities. First and foremost, no one, and I mean no one across the nation, has enough equipment or has enough personnel to go to 12 or 13 bus riders per bus. Mm-hmm. That would be taking it down from 70 down to 12 or 13.
Right.
So two things. First of all, we're asking any and all parents that can provide transportation for their children or their neighbors' children, taking them to and from school this year, please do so. Bus riding or transportation is really one of those things I think people have become very accustomed to and almost expected. But frankly, there is no requirement to provide bus transportation for students. So I understand that we're asking folks for this year if they can help their kiddos get to school a different way other than the bus. And I do believe that we'll have a question on the questionnaire to see if parents could help us out with that.
That is correct. We're going to tag something onto the questionnaire just about if you used bus transportation service in the past, what you could, if it's possible to provide an alternative this year. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
So that was point number one. Point number two is that if you're going to ride the bus, it will be 2 to a seat. And we would love for family members, the expectation is for family members to sit together in those seats. And then you will be required to wear a mask. Now, I understand that is going to be difficult, maybe for our younger kiddos, kindergarten, first, second, third grade. So that's why I'm also imploring parents of younger children to get them accustomed to wearing a mask now. I've worn a mask now for many months, and it does take some adjustment, but I also understand I'm not an adolescent any longer. And those kids that have been at home and haven't really been out much may find it difficult to understand what social distancing means. So really asking our parents to help reinforce that with their children, also to help them really build up capacity of wearing a mask, because that is the requirement if you're going to ride the bus.
Sure. And Drew just asked, and I think this is a great question to follow up as you're talking about that, is the EVSC providing the masks? So.
We will have masks available. I did calculate earlier that if we would provide a mask for every student for every day, that's $1.2 million. So certainly that would be an additional expense that would come at a cost of other things.
Sure.
But I know that I've used disposable mask, and then I've also used cloth mask, and I really prefer a cloth mask. And if people want to help with that, we would be very happy to receive their assistance, but we will have masks available should a student need them.
Right. And ideally, a lot of our students would be able to provide their own from home, but certainly we'll make that happen if that becomes a hindrance to them. So, okay. So, and I just want to clarify that one more time on that school bus. Again, if you're going to utilize bus transportation, you just have to wear a mask, because we've got to try to make that environment as safe as possible.
Yes. And we understand that in August and September, and probably in October too, the buses can be very hot.
Right.
The mask will be uncomfortable. But when you weigh the two options, if you're going to continue to avail yourselves of riding bus transportation, then you're going to have to utilize a mask.
Right. Well, let's continue the mask conversation. So, what about once you enter the school building? You want to talk about what it's going to look like for students. And we get this question a lot. We have in the last 2 weeks. Are you going to require masks in the building? What about the classroom, the hallways, that type of thing? So let's talk about that for a minute, if you would.
So at this point in time, we are not requiring the mask in the classroom. We're not saying that you can't wear one, but we've not received guidance that says that you have to wear a mask in the classroom if you can practice social distancing.
And that's the key, because hopefully we've got our classrooms in a position where we have allowed for that, or we will by the time school starts.
Absolutely. So I think basically, and probably now would be a good time to talk about the definition of what close contact is with somebody that has tested positive with COVID-19. Now the definition, as we sit here on July the 6th, is that it's currently defined as within 6 feet for 15 minutes or longer. So if you are within 6 feet of someone for 15 minutes and longer, and that individual is tested positive, then you have a higher probability of catching COVID-19 from them. So I think that's important to note. That's why where we cannot adhere to social distancing guidelines, like in a hallway, where it may be more problematic, where the expectation is for individuals to wear masks. Now, naturally, if you're in elementary school and you deal with a lot of kindergartners, first and second graders, what you're going to do there is to try to limit the opportunity for people to be out in the hallway at the same time. So I'm not saying that everybody that's in the hallway is going to be expected to wear the mask. What we're trying to do is to look at those situations where we can accomplish social distancing. I think it's also important to note that one of the tenets of keeping people safe is also to try to keep them in cohorts. That is much easier to accomplish in the elementary schools, more difficult in the middle, and very difficult in the high school. But if we keep them in cohorts of 15 to 18 students, then contact tracing and other things like that are much more readily accomplished, as well as making certain then that it just makes the flow much easier if we keep kids in cohorts.
While you were talking about masks, and that makes sense about cohorts, and speaking of masks, Rick just sent a question in, and he said, what are the guidelines for masks, and as far as, are there going to be a color requirement if they have something on them, that type of thing? And I think must be thinking dress code type things, but you want to touch on that?
Yeah, and I think I would respond to Rick. I do want you to think of them as an extension of the dress code. Nothing offensive can be on the mask.
Nothing scary.
Nothing scary. And
right.
I've seen masks that are scary. We're not talking about Halloween masks. We're talking about face coverings here. But basically, use good common sense. And if something is on a mask that is deemed inappropriate, then we will have a substitute mask for the student that day.
Okay. And another thing with masks, and I've seen questions about this, so I'll touch on it. And I know you've had conversations, obviously, with our director of exceptional needs, our special education director, and I just happened to have a conversation with her as well earlier this afternoon. I know we do have concern from some parents who have a child with a disability, they have an IEP. What about them requiring to wear masks? And I know when she and I were having this conversation earlier, she said obviously they're going to work on that through their teacher of record. There may even be a need to conference. But for some of that, we may have some students who, because of a disability, wouldn't be able to wear a mask. They'll look at alternatives, perhaps a face shield, whatever is going to be the best situation for that.
Yeah, great question. Nicole Alcorn and her staff really do a phenomenal job. And on the continuum of special needs kiddos, we have some that are consultant only, all the way to some that are in just really medically fragile, self-contained classrooms. So I know that Nicole and her staff have already reached out to many parents of special needs students and will continue to do so. But you make a great point. We also have, I think, around 5,000 shields now. So specifically for a teacher in primary grades, if a teacher wants, and certainly understand that, but additional protection and is concerned that the face covering like a mask would be problematic when they talk about diction and phonics and phonemic, all of those things where you actually need to see the mouth as it moves to produce sounds, then those face shields I think are very, very good for that purpose. Clearly a mask or other face covering is probably better to prevent the spread, but face shields are also very effective. So we would have those for teachers and then also staff as well as any student through an IEP that would deem that to be necessary. And also, if a student would want to wear that, they certainly could provide their own.
It's funny you said that. We just had a question from Leanne. Are face shields acceptable in place of a mask if my child cannot get comfortable wearing a mask?
I think that's a great question, and absolutely yes.
Okay. While this isn't directly related to masks, earlier when you were talking about riding the school bus and then coming into the building, we did get a question from Diane, and I've seen this question as well. What about morning and afternoon care, daycare, extended day in our elementary buildings? You want to answer that if we're having that?
We will still have extended day before and after school, but they will have to adhere to social distancing guidelines. So.
Okay. So really just kind of an extension of the regular day, same thing. Those individuals that work in our extended day program will try to put the same protocols in place to create a safe environment.
Absolutely.
Okay. Let's jump into a different topic, Dr. Smith, and this is one that we've already received several questions on since we started here at 5 o'clock, and that is the fact that we had announced all the way back to early last fall, and our board approved a start date of August the 5th. Of course, that was long before we knew anything about COVID-19, but at this point, I know we're still planning on starting on August the 5th, but I know there's been talk, especially when we had to change commencements, about that start date. You want to talk about that, where we stand at least right now?
Sure. Great question. I know that last Wednesday, the governor also made the comment that he still fully expects school to be able to have in-person instruction when school starts.
Of course, he's talking about schools all over Indiana, not just Evansville.
So I think there's been some attraction to people requesting or asking us to consider moving the start date back. I've heard anywhere from 2 weeks to a month to until COVID-19 is no longer with us. And we don't certainly know when that will be. But I think that probably was initiated from conversations that our friends across the river were having. In Kentucky, there were a couple school districts that did move their start date back, but they added time on to each day. And Kentucky is different than Indiana. They don't have a minimum day requirement. They have, I think, length of time. So Indiana still has 180 days of attendance. That's the requirement. Kentucky doesn't have that. They're a different model. So when we investigated this, and that was something else that we thought about, my concern is that the fact that COVID-19 mimics flu, we want to get as much of the school year in before flu season starts, because once again, if you're symptomatic of 2 symptoms of COVID-19, be it a high fever of 100.4 or above, dry cough, other kinds of symptoms that mimic the flu and COVID-19, we're going to assume you have COVID-19, which would mean that you would be out of school a longer period of time.
And that's based on guidance that we've received to this point.
Clearly. It's interesting. Dr. Box, American Academy of Pediatricians, all say it's important for kids to be in school. Now, these are healthcare professionals that I pay attention to and whose opinion really matters to me. So I will admit that we are starting date-wise earlier than it seems like we have in the past, but it really is the way the calendar falls.
It does typically back up slightly.
Right. So if we were to back this up to after Labor Day, for instance, then that means that we would finish the first semester 3 weeks after Christmas break with finals and things like that, which is somewhat problematic, but still I'm concerned about condensing school time in with COVID-19 and the flu season, and I would like to stay away from that as long as we possibly can.
Sure. Well, and that makes sense. And while we're talking about, students maybe getting ill, that type of thing, let's talk about the school nurse, certainly a vital position in any school. But based on everything that's going on for next year, we're going to do a change to that I think people will feel good about. You want to talk about that?
Sure. We are blessed with phenomenal nursing staff. We have nurses in all of our schools, and the good news is next year they will be full-time. So they will be there before the students enter school, and they will be there after students go home. They are the healthcare expert that we'll have in each of our buildings. Diane Butler, who is phenomenal, who is our chief nurse, if you will, has a direct contact with Lynn Herr from the health department. That's our liaison there. So there is a seamless connection between EVSC, our individual schools or school nurses, and then with the health department. So we just know next year, with all the concerns that I have, that we all have, that it would be important to assure parents that we will have a healthcare professional in our buildings every minute that the students are there. They will be the ones, if a student starts saying that they're symptomatic, that then that nurse will take them to the isolation room and they will handle that from step one to the end.
Because certainly in a situation like this, we want a medical professional making decisions, offering guidance to students, to staff, to parents. And of course, that school nurse will be a key person in doing that. And you may have experienced in the past when their schedule was slightly shorter, there could have been a time at the beginning of the day or end of the day where the nurse was gone. So
there was. And state law just requires us to have one nurse
for the entire
23,000 kids. Well, we have 42.
Right. This question came in yesterday. In fact, someone sent it over the weekend, but it's got a few questions. And this is a tricky one, and so let's jump in because I've seen this from other people as well. And it said, can you please discuss what happens if a student or a teacher tests positive for COVID? Will the school close for 14 days? Will just the class be asked to quarantine for 14 days or neither? Will people be notified? So I do think, and we've seen this since we've started here at 5 o'clock, scrolling through to what happens if and when someone tests positive.
Well, appreciate the question. And, this is an answer that probably no one will be happy with because it will be somewhat dependent upon the conditions and what we discover. But once again, I want to reiterate that close contact is currently defined as within 6 feet for 15 minutes or greater. So that could be the definition of a classroom, although we are very confident that we can have appropriate social distancing within the classroom. I also will tell you that younger elementary age kids, the first several weeks might have difficulty understanding that concept. So what we're going to do is we are going to assume that if there have been positive tests for an individual in that classroom, we're going to assume that everyone then has been exposed and will test positive for COVID until a healthcare professional says, no, you do not have COVID-19. So that means that they would have to self-quarantine at home. That means that option B would kick into effect for the classroom. And so that would be if the teacher tests positive for COVID-19, if a student or two students test positive in the classroom. This is going to be incredibly complicated.
Definitely.
We would not, at least unless the health department would expect us to, we would not close a school down if one or two students in a classroom tested positive. What we would do would be we'd do a thorough cleansing. Daryl Angermauer and his crew have researched products, and we feel very good about the products that we're using. They're good and safe, and they're very effective on COVID-19. So we do the thorough cleansing in addition to the constant cleaning throughout the day on high contact surfaces. And then basically we're going to, according to the guidance we have now, assume that you've been exposed and you would test positive, so we would expect you to go home. I understand that is going to be incredibly disruptive.
Sure.
But I think we're in the situation that we're in now, frankly, because as the restrictions have been relaxed, people think that the precautions were relaxed. And that's not the case. There's an uptick in the positive number of cases, not just because there's more testing, but I've seen it when I've gone out to run errands or whatever, and I have a mask on, and everybody doesn't have a mask
Sure.
on. And I frankly think that when the restrictions have been eased, that people thought, well, okay, the restrictions are eased, so that means that the precautions have eased. Right. That's not the case. The restrictions have eased, but the precautions remain. So I hope and pray that this community gets back into understanding everybody needs to still utilize those precautions: social distance, wear a mask, frequent thorough hand washing, and cleaning high-touch surfaces. But also, I think that's about the only way that we can stem the tide. So I know that's a
And that's
long
not
answer.
just here locally either, or in this state. That is nationwide. We've seen that.
But I will assure you that actually back in March when we closed, that there were probably people in our community that had COVID-19. They may have been asymptomatic at the time.
Sure.
But so it's going to be here until we get herd immunity or until we have a vaccine.
Sure.
Or a combination of the two.
And as we said at the very beginning of this Facebook Live event, this is why it is so paramount for us to stay in constant contact with our local and our state health officials, because they're not only seeing what's happening here or what could potentially happen here, they're dealing with schools that will be reopening all over the state. So their guidance will be so key for us as we continue to move forward.
Absolutely.
It's kind of a follow-up question to that. I thought this was a good point. April just asked, will faculty and staff be tested before returning to work? And I think the same could apply for students too. Are we requiring a test?
Great question. We are not requiring that at this point in time. Once again, that could change, but the guidance right now is that not be a requirement. Also, Dr. Box's recommendation is that we ask all parents to self-screen their children at home before they come to school. Why is that? Because, as Dr. Box noted, that in order for schools to do that, then you would create a lot of congestion. It really goes against social distancing. So basically what we're asking parents to do is to make certain that their kids have not had a fever within the last 72 hours without the aid of fever-reducing medication, and that they are not symptomatic of any COVID-related symptoms.
And, we've said several times in conversations, and what we mean by this when we say this is not the year to be a hero,
Right.
We're talking to staff members, employees. Of course, you've always thought of that employee who, even if they don't feel well, they do their best. They come in and they go to work anyway. Even students, they don't want to miss that day of school, so they come in even when they're not feeling well. This is not the year for that. We always say, if you're sick, please stay home, and that's never been more crucial than going forward for this school year.
Completely agree, and I can't emphasize that enough. You're not being a hero by coming in and toughing it out. That may have been the mantra of past years, past generations, but please protect yourself and protect others. Once again, if you have a temperature of 100.4 or above, you have to stay home, and that is the temperature that we've been given by the healthcare experts, 100.4 and above.
Well, and speaking of that, I thought this was a great question too. We just got one from Katie, and she asked, what about attendance requirements? Because in the past, we always keep track of attendance and that type of thing. You want to touch base on that?
We're still going to keep track of attendance, but we also are pleading with parents to communicate with us why their child is out. I think I've already alluded to our school personnel are going to be called upon to do more tasks than even in previous years, if that's humanly possible. So I'm just asking parents, if your child is home, please contact us and tell us the reason why. We still have attendance requirements. This is not a free pass, but we also, to your earlier point, Jason, we don't want people coming in that are sick. Okay?
Absolutely.
We've got a great relationship with the juvenile judge. I know he doesn't want people coming in that are sick. And I think we'll be able to discern if somebody is not being genuine in their need to stay home versus someone that is.
Okay. For this next several questions, Dr. Smith, these were all submitted to us last week through the Contact Us feature of our website. So you can always go to the EVSC website, evscschools.com. That's where we house all the latest information. There's a Contact Us feature where you can submit a question. So some of these came through over the last week before the holiday weekend. So let me share some of these with you. And they get a little bit detailed, or asking for details, but I think that's where people's heads are right now as they're thinking about moving forward. So,
and just want to reiterate that many of the details that you seek may have to come from school-specific guidance, okay? Once again, we're making decisions that influence and impact all schools, and then they will take those and make them malleable and meet the unique conditions of their school population, their school facilities, their staff. So I may not be able to answer every question because it may be specific to a grade level and a specific school, but I'll be happy to give my best.
Well, you're very right. If you have a child and they go to one particular elementary school and their cousin goes to one on the other side of town, while the overall parameters are similar, there could be a variance in the answers or the specifics because of the number of students in the building, the size of the facilities, that type of thing, or siblings from an elementary to a middle to high or high.
Absolutely.
So that's a great point. So this first one, will related arts classes, so we're talking about gym, art, music, that type of thing. We have great related arts teachers, and that's such an important part of the day for our kids. Are they going to look different this year? Will they even happen, this person asked, and if so, how will they look different?
Broadly speaking, yes, they will definitely happen. Will they look different? Yes, they will. Once again, in utilizing our spaces to the optimal position possible, many of our related arts classrooms are larger spaces in our schools. And then also understanding the importance of keeping cohorts together, what we are doing in many of our schools, not all, but many of our schools, is we would take the teacher, the related arts teacher, to the classroom instead of taking the students to the teacher, specifically in the elementary grades. So it may mean, if you're a related arts teacher, that you may be on one of those infamous carts. I was a teacher that was on a cart, okay? So I understand that that's not the optimal situation.
You did survive, though.
I did survive. And I'm here to tell you that this is a short-term solution so that our community and our kids and our staff can stay as healthy as possible.
Well, and really, everything we're saying, Dr. Smith, tonight, we hope and we pray that this does not go on for terribly long. I mean, ideally, it'd be for a semester. It could be the whole year. We don't know. But certainly, we hope we're talking about short-term descriptions of how we're handling this, not long-term, we hope.
Right. And in my mind, I think the ideal scenario is that this time next year, it is basically returned to normal. I know that's aggressive.
But you have to hope.
But that's where I am.
One more point back to that, what you were talking about, just to clarify. I think what you're getting at is in an elementary school, for example, we may need to take an art teacher and have them actually go to the rooms for that art class.
Correct.
Because that art classroom is a nice, large classroom, and we may need to put a second grade room in that, for example, to create more space.
Correct.
Okay. So that maybe is applicable a little more to elementary or middle, sometimes high school as well, though. But let's jump over to high school. Someone asked last week, what about block scheduling at the high school level?
Well, I'll take you back to the beginning of this time together, and it was basically, in order to accomplish social distancing, we're not creating more square feet, so you have to use the square feet that you have in a different way. So basically, we're spreading our kids out in additional classes and in additional spaces. So in order to have additional classes, basically block scheduling is not going to occur this year because we can have more classes formulated in more of a traditional day. So high school schedules will be more of the traditional day that we had a decade ago.
And as you said, it's a move like that is necessary to try to create more space to spread students out for social distancing purposes.
So more space, for instance, more English 9 classes. Instead of having 25 students in the English 9 class, we're going to have 15 to 18. Well, that means you're going to have more
somewhere to
sections
go.
of that.
Sure.
Right.
Sure, absolutely. Another individual had asked, and it's funny, they asked this last week with things starting today, but athletics, are they safe for students to participate in?
You know, I appreciate the guidance of the High School Athletic Association. We have a phenomenal director of athletics in Andy Owen. And he and the athletic directors, as well as the head coaches, have worked as a phenomenal team and put
For
in
many
place
weeks.
yes, many weeks, and put in place great safety protocols to keep our athletes safe. You know, I checked in and to see how it was going today. He said we had phenomenal turnout. Things are going very well. So I certainly anticipate that will continue. You know, but they also are doing things a little bit differently.
Sure.
You know, we've had marching bands start today too, and I saw photos of students practicing social distancing. I mean, it helps that these events are outside.
Sure.
But, you know, clearly practicing social distancing and taking the precautions necessary. You know, they're not having the common watering tube or anything like they have their own source of water. They're taking care of themselves, which I think shows an incredible amount of responsibility and, frankly, what I would expect of our students and our families.
Well, and fortunately, in the fall sports season for athletics, really we only have one sport that's inside. That's volleyball, and I know they're even taking precautions when they come into the gym, not all clustering together, not putting all of their gym bags all together, but spacing out for when coaches are talking. And as you said, the rest of our activities, including something like marching band, takes place outside. So that does help. But I know I spoke to Andy Owen as well today, and he said you could tell the coaches and the players were doing such a nice job of trying to keep all of this in mind, even as they were moving through practices. He was very pleased.
Yeah, and, you know, hats off to our coaches, to our athletic directors, to our teachers. They have the kids' best interest at heart, you know, and I think,
No doubt.
you know, in this difficult time, I think you're going to see us rise to the occasion in ways that people haven't seen before.
Well, and I think you alluded to this earlier, but what you just said made me think of this. We know kids, well, everyone, but especially kids, will continue to get better with this as far as understanding.
Correct.
So on day one, on August 5th, it will probably look different if you forward 10 days after you've been in school 2 weeks. Students, even our youngest students, will learn and get the hang of this, and people will understand it more. So we know kids learn. We know kids are very resilient, and they move forward. So whether it's a high school athlete or a first grader, we know they're going to get better every day at understanding this situation.
Only thing I want to add about high school athletics and extracurriculars is it is a phased-in approach. So they're dealing in their cohorts, basically like similar skill positions and all that, working with fundamentals and other kinds of training to get ready for the season. So it's not like we're having contact scrimmages right now.
Absolutely. This question actually came in earlier when we were talking about the virtual academy, but it fits in perfectly right here. Luke asked this question. So students enrolled in virtual academy, can they participate in EVSC sports and extracurricular activities? I think that's a great question when parents are considering that.
Great question, and I'll just answer it this way. We actually have a policy that would require you to be enrolled in at least one brick and mortar class, but I'll just be very frank.
No, please. I think that's helpful.
For those folks that want to avail themselves of the virtual academy because they're either apprehensive or they have someone that has a weakened immune system at their house or their child, I have no understanding of how they need to be separate from a brick and mortar facility and away from students during the school day, but then say it's okay then to be in an extracurricular like band or football. To me, that's pretty hypocritical, and I know that's a strong statement, but you know, if you have those legitimate concerns and you want to avail yourselves of the virtual academy because of those concerns, to me, those concerns are 24/7.
But I'm so glad you mentioned that, and I'm glad we had that question. You were able to address it because we know parents are making decisions. They're taking the best information they can gather and making informed decisions. So if you are considering virtual academy, which is either a 9-week commitment for elementary or middle students, or a semester-long commitment for high school students, please keep that in mind, that those extracurriculars are off the table if you're choosing that option to keep, because of health concerns.
And I understand that not all sport is like football. You could have cross country, but every cross country meet I saw, they were always bunched up at the beginning, be it outside. Then I understand golf, but you also have to understand how you're going to get there, how you're going to get back, how you're going to have. So the short answer is, if you're availing yourselves of virtual academy, that's where you are.
Okay. I wanted to throw this one in because other people may have this question. Julie just submitted this one, and she said, Dr. Smith has used the word cohort several times as far as how kids will operate in the building. What exactly are you talking about?
Sure.
So you want to say that? I'm sure we have that question a lot.
A group.
Okay.
So in other words, if you have...
Kind of an organized group.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. So if you have Mrs. Smith's kindergarten classroom of 15 kids, then Mrs. Smith's classroom of 15 kids is going to stay together for the day.
Okay.
Yeah.
And again, that helps not only with keeping people safe, but heaven forbid, if we do have a positive case, then we want to be able to go back and see who's been in contact and do that contact tracing.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And hats off to the health department, because I think that's why Vanderbilt County really has been spared, at least in the initial stages, because they did such a great job with contact tracing. And then
Definitely.
if you came in close contact with somebody that tested positive, they were able to contact you and you could self-quarantine. The research I've read, for everyone that has COVID-19, they can spread it to 4 to 6 people. So what you want to do is know who has it, and then know who they've been around, and then help those folks practice safe practices.
I'm kind of watching the clock while we're doing this, so we're approaching towards the end. We're getting close to 6 o'clock, so I want to make sure we get a few more questions in here, because I think these look like they're very informative, or they could be very informative. And again, just want to remind people, of course, this is Facebook Live, but this stays on our Facebook feed. So if you just had a chance getting home from work to joining us, you can go back and look at any time. It will remain in our feed. Over the next couple of days, we'll take what you and I have talked about, and we're going to add that to the FAQ section on the EVSC website. That's at evscschools.com. So you can always go back if you prefer to look at written questions and answers. So let's hit a few more before we wrap. Dr. Smith, this individual, and another question from last week, said, what will recess, first of all, will schools have recess, elementary schools? What will it look like? And also, what about PE, or physical education, gym class?
Certainly. And I'll answer that on several different levels, which may help explain the difference between an enterprise solution and then a school-based solution, enterprise being the whole district. So recess, yes, we know how vitally important it is for kids to get outside, to have the opportunity to have exercise. And we also know that in terms of preventing COVID-19 from spreading, that outside is very, very good. And in fact, the guidance from overseas and other research says that if you can move classrooms outside, because it makes everything much easier, at least for the transmission of COVID-19. So yes, will it look different? It will look a little different, because we will once again ask kids to stay in their groups or their cohorts. Instead of intermingling with all the kindergarten classes, we want you to stay in your group. So we probably will have areas of the kindergarten or the playground cordoned off or striped off in sections for you to stay there. We'll look at any toy or things that they play with would be sanitized, right? And then I'm going to leave it really up to the individual schools. If they feel like they have the staff and the ability to sanitize and clean the playground equipment in between the different groups, then kids can use the playground equipment. If the schools don't feel like they have the staff and the ability to do that, then the playground equipment, swings, monkey bars, those kind of things, then would not be utilized.
And that could even be within one playground, maybe a couple of pieces they're able to stay on top of and get clean and disinfected, where another piece they're not able to do that.
Right.
So really, as you said, that's going to be a school by school based situation.
Yes.
Okay. A couple of questions just came in. Sure. No, please.
I mentioned PE.
Oh, that's right.
Certainly expect PE classes to continue.
Okay.
And, there are so many studies that show the importance of that, and our PE teachers are so good at incorporating that within the daily schedule and one's daily life. We want kids to have a passion from early on to be physically fit.
Well, we have this conversation all the time. I mean, we've always been so dedicated to social emotional learning. We know a big part of that is physical movement and, getting up, moving, getting fresh air when you can. And certainly the need for those type of things don't go away, because we know even more so with kids being out of school as long as they have, we've got to still have those things in place that they need to help them learn and thrive.
We know how much movement and hydration stimulate chemical reactions for the good in the brain.
Right. Definitely. Let's see. This question comes from Cindy. She says, if a student is required to self-isolate, would that student's siblings also be required to quarantine?
I think the short answer is, and this is not a definitive, but the shorter answer is yes, if they have been in prolonged or close contact.
In the same home?
Within, right. Within 6 feet for 15 minutes or more, yes.
Right. Another question, this actually just came in from several people instead of one individual. And I think I know what you're going to say here, because, we can't watch every single parent, but this is where we're going to really ask for people to really work with us. What happens when parents aren't taking appropriate screening measures for their child before they come to school? And I think you're going to say, please work with us on this. We need everyone's help.
Please work with us. And additionally, if we feel that is the case, then we have other options.
Sure.
We can educate kids virtually.
Right.
So it's, we take this very seriously. We certainly expect parents to do that too. And if we do feel that a parent is not doing that, and I don't want to be harsh, but we'll do what we need to do to protect our students.
Sure. I know this is something on people's minds as we get closer to the official start of school, and that is typically we would have open houses at the beginning of the year, especially maybe parents, if they're moving to a school for the first time, really are looking at that, but a lot of people enjoy that every year. You want to talk about that change?
Absolutely. I think one of the huge benefits of having an open house is the ability to socialize and to be able to meet your child's teachers and to see the lay of the school. We will not have open houses in the traditional sense, but we will have virtual open houses.
Okay.
So that's where you can take a tour, and I know that it will look different, but frankly, folks, school's going to look a lot different this year. It's not going to be like what we had last year. It won't be what we experienced the last quarter. I hope and pray that we don't have to close every school at the same time. Sure. If we do, we have done our research. We put things in place where it will be far superior to what we experienced the last quarter of last year. But I do think we're going to have intermittent closings, be it a classroom, maybe 2 classrooms, 3, hopefully not entire schools, but it's going to look different, just like virtual open house is going to be different than the traditional open houses of years gone by.
I'm going to read you a question, Dr. Smith, that came in last week, but as I'm monitoring the Facebook Live questions, we're getting lots of questions about this, so I think it's a great topic to talk about. So this individual says, we have so many courses of study, so many programs that make our school system exceptional. We have music, we have the Career and Tech Center, we have the Shepherd Law Academy, MPA. They're talking about our innovative model programs. So they're saying, which are for our high school students, will these programs be impacted by COVID-19? Will they be available to students? And will there still be bus transportation for students to get on a daily basis from their home school to innovative models? Because they attend both each day. So it's a popular question. Let's talk about that.
Sure, and lots of questions within that question. First of all, yes, they will continue.
Okay.
Will they look different? Probably. An example would be MPA. We have great partnership with our healthcare providers. We may not be able to go on site to the 2 major hospitals as we've done in the past. So what can we do to bring that experience into them virtually? We're blessed with phenomenal technology in our classrooms. So just because we can't go out on site doesn't mean that we can't bring the site into our classroom. Mm-hmm. So we want to do everything we possibly can to still give incredibly rich experiences to our students. And I appreciate the question, because we have become well known for those innovative models that give our kids so much.
Well, the Southern Indiana Career and Tech Center is one of those, and that was another follow-up question to that. So I assume from that answer, we plan on that being open as well.
Yes, we do. With the appropriate precautions in place. Mentioned also busing and how to transport kids to
Yeah, let's talk about that because that could be a change from previous years.
Well, in the past, we have really discouraged students from driving.
Right.
But now with parent permission, if parent gives their child permission to drive from school A to school B in the middle of the day, or ask for some things to be completed, but we're going to allow that this year just to help lighten the load for transportation and to make everything work and flow.
Right. Okay. A couple of quick ones here, and then we're going to wrap up because we're actually just now going past our hour mark. So somebody asked a question here about, can you say again why we don't just have all kinds of staggered start times across the district? That's one of those things that may seem easier, but to try to do 40 schools at a variety of different times would be complicated, I assume, is where you would go with that.
And I'm not certain if they're talking about time of day or when we actually start back.
I think they're talking about time of day, looking at their question.
Well, it's good. I have said for many, many years that EVSC is a great size. We're large enough to where we have the opportunity to offer innovative models. Mm-hmm. We have phenomenal music and related arts programs, but yet we're not so big to where we cannot respond in a nimble fashion. One of the great things about having our size is that we have an outstanding transportation fleet, but it is not used by one school. It's used by 40 schools. So there has to be some interconnectedness, and all of those schedules have to relate to one another. So that's why we do have pretty much standardized start and end times. Now, I'm not going to say that we won't vary that somewhat next year, and I'm not saying that we're going to vary next year. We're going to continue to make certain that we put the best scenarios in place for our students.
Right.
But primarily, through what I would call standard work, there is some efficiency of scale that way.
Right.
And that's what we found in our bus transportation.
But as you said, in this year that is full of such uncertainty, we may be looking at anything. I mean, we really do. We look at all options on the table at all times to make sure that we're going to have as safe an environment for all of our kids as possible.
And I don't want people to think that I'm being evasive, but not to get too far in the weeds, but we have what is called rollover, and that's coming up on Wednesday, and that is where we take all the computer stuff from last year and roll it into next year. When we do that, that's really when we have to start routing our buses. We can't do a whole lot before that to a certain extent, but that's where I would suggest we finalize routing. So when we're asking bus transportation to go from routes that they had last year to making them more conducive for the needs that we have in COVID-19, that's a tremendous amount of work to put on them. If they find that we don't have the personnel or the equipment to get that accomplished, then we could stagger the start time of perhaps a high school attendance district a little bit later or a little bit earlier, whatever the case may be. Basically to make schedules work for everybody and to make bus routes work for everybody.
Okay. I see two more quick questions I think we can squeeze in here.
Maybe quick questions, my answers may not be.
No, that's all right. I'll take care of the first one for you because it is a simple one. Special ed, if my child has an IEP, where do I go for answers? And I know from talking to Nicole today, stay in contact with that teacher of record because that is your point of contact. That can be done informally through a conversation, but certainly if there's a need to come to case conference to put things in place, that can definitely happen.
Also, they can email their principal. Hats off to principals and staffs working through the summer. Principals are back in, I think, on July 22nd or 24th.
I don't have that in front of me here. The 2 weeks before.
Yes, 2 weeks before students return.
Right. Lauren just sent this question. Sent this in. It's an important one. Will kids still be able to eat breakfast before school?
Yes.
Okay, simple question, simple answer. If we could, Dr. Smith, before we wrap up, I'd like to put the slide back up with the three options because I just want to take a minute. You gave a great in-depth explanation of that, but I want to just go through that again for people that may have missed that part. So as we go forward, we've talked about options looking forward as we're preparing to start. So three options. You want to just take us through that quickly?
Option A, learning at school. That's the traditional brick and mortar, but with the precautions in place that we know that best practice says we should be practicing.
And I know I've
put in
heard you
place.
say before, just because we use the word traditional, we're referring to going to school as you know it.
Right.
Doesn't mean traditional in the sense we're not putting lots of things in place, and a lot of work hasn't gone into making sure that's a safe
There are a
environment.
few guarantees in life. I will guarantee you this: it's not going to be a traditional year.
Okay.
But option A is what people would normally subscribe as
We're going to school. Yes.
learning at school. Option B, the remote, that really only is germane, I think, to the conversation once school starts up. And that, once again, is something temporary so that kids would come and go into that remote option as required by COVID-19. And then finally, option C, or virtual academy. Once again, we're expanding our curriculum, we're expanding our capacity, and that would be something for a K-8 student. If their parents apprehensive and not certain how it's going to work out, well, then the virtual academy might be a great option for them. Anybody that selects that, we will contact them. Virtual academy for K-8 for the first 9 weeks, that first quarter, that's the commitment. And then for high school students, it would be for the first semester because of the credits that they earn.
Okay. And again, to show the difference, the remote learning option B, is something that would maybe suddenly pop up in terms of a possible exposure within an immediate family, causing a quarantine type situation. Could be a week, could be 2 weeks. It's not the commitment to the virtual academy like option C is.
Yeah, I would say that the remote option B, is really based upon the conditions that you have at the time that are temporary in nature.
Okay. Let's go over a few things, and then I'll ask you for any final comments you want to make, Dr. Smith. First of all, again, we talked about that parent questionnaire. So we'll send out a phone call to all 22,000 plus students to their families tomorrow evening, where we'll kind of explain what they can expect if they haven't heard that. Then on Wednesday, they're going to get that survey, and it's going to be a very brief questionnaire is what I should say. And in that, they're going to be giving us where they see their families right now, where they see their children, either in that option A, that learn at school, back to the school environment, or really option C, thinking about enrolling in the virtual academy. And like you said, it's either a grading period long commitment for K-8, 9 weeks, or semester long, half a year for high school.
And if I may,
No, please.
we staff for fall in February.
And when you say staff, for somebody who's not familiar, that's where we look at the number of students in a school, and from that data, we then prepare how many teachers that we need in that school to teach those children. Bigger the school, more staff you have.
Correct. So, and then if you have a large third grade, for instance, you would have maybe more third grade teachers than you would second grade teachers. So it really is important, and I appreciate everyone's patience, but I also appreciate their thoughtful and intentionality in answering the questionnaire, because we're going to adjust our staffing based upon what parents say they need for their child next year. So it's really important that we've got phenomenal teachers, excellent staff, but we want to make certain that we have the staff and the extra capacity where we need it.
Well, and that capacity is the key word, because if we have more people, then maybe we're thinking, whatever the data shows, that if we'd enroll in the virtual academy, obviously we have to increase capacity there to meet the needs of those students, and you'd have less capacity or less need in the regular school environment. Also, want to continue to remind people, please go to our website, evscschools.com. That's where we post all of this information, including an FAQ where we take what you and I talk about in any of these podcasts, live tonight or any of the ones we release, put it in writing if you want to take a look at that. Encourage everyone to follow us on Facebook. We're extremely active. We get a great response from that. We can see the engagements. We have so many people that are following us on that now. So if you don't follow us on that, please consider doing that. And then just any final thoughts you want to make in these very uncertain times that we find ourselves in.
Yes, and first of all, I would think if this is beneficial, that we'll be happy to do another Facebook or FaceTime on
Facebook Live, sure.
Yeah, thank you. Because we do want to be responsive to parents, and this was just one way to get feedback from our parents.
Sure.
As you mentioned, we've had multiple opportunities to get
all the feedback we've received. We, in all the meetings we're in, we take that so seriously, and it really has shaped the things we've talked about in the last hour tonight.
Clearly has. So I hope everybody understands that, the decisions that we made early on and how those have cascading effects, and how we're now at the point to where schools can put in place the practices that they need to based upon overarching themes that EVSC has established for the safety and well-being of our students and staff, and so that then more information will be forthcoming for our parents and for our students. Please understand, though, that our schools, many schools, are having to reschedule every single student in their building.
Correct.
And then reschedule teachers. So there's a tremendous amount of work that still has to take place. There has been so much work that's already taken place to get us to where we are now. But I appreciate the parents and the students, the patience that they have.
That patience is a key
Yes.
word, knowing that things have to change sometimes, and that is so important.
Yes. And then, just hats off to our incredible staff. This is going to be a year that probably no one could have ever expected. But I do know from past experiences that we'll rise to the occasion, and we will serve every student to the best of our ability to make certain that when they look back on COVID-19 a year later, a decade later, or a lifetime later, they're going to know that while things were different, things were not worse.
Okay. I think that's a great way to leave it tonight. We thank you for your time sharing. We've really made this commitment, Dr. Smith, from last March, that there's no secrets. What we know, we want everyone to know. So as we continue to move forward and whatever changes, tweaks there has to be, we're going to put it out there, whether it's social media, whether it's another Facebook Live, whether it's, through a phone call system. We want people to know where we're at, because parents deserve that, and so do our kids, and we can't wait to see our families again back in action.
I am looking forward to August the 5th.
Definitely. All right, David, thanks so much for this time.
Thank you.
And more information to come.
Sounds good.